All right, everyone, welcome to Morbid Planet. I'm your host, Erin Chapman. Before we start tonight, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe and hit the button below for us. Tonight, our special guest we have is, was a director on the latest vampire and paranormal documentary, The Curse of the Highgate Vampire, which was a vampire case that started in the 1970s in England. And other documentaries that he's done as well is one about Vlad the Impaler, there was Stonehenge, Merlin, and so many other projects that he's worked on. So give a warm welcome to Andy Robbins. Thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me.
So I was looking at your CV, and you've done so many interesting documentaries. The latest one was concerning the Highgate Vampire. And like I said, there was Vlad the Impaler. I saw Stonehenge. There was some things about astronauts. There's things about weather. You've just done so many different things. Can you tell me, just because I don't know a lot about behind the scenes, what do you actually do when you're a director on projects like these? What are you responsible for? And how do you get new gigs? Is it like a referral thing, or do people just like track you down and they ask you to do their projects?
It's a combination of things. People do track you down. Most big broadcasters have a list of directors that you have to
Okay.
So you're on a list for a lot of broadcasters, and when broadcasters commission a program or commission a film, it's usually based on some spurious document that's made up by the production company to sell it, and then I'm brought in to actually turn it into a film. And then my job then is to take whatever story the channel have agreed to commission and make it a film. So that's my job, and often that involves actually, trying to. Sorry, I'm just being joined by the dog here who's trying to get on.
That's okay.
And yeah, that's largely what I do. I then kind of take the vague idea for a television program or a film and actually turn it into a reality. So that's what I do.
Okay. And when, like, I guess, as everything does, they evolve and projects change over the time. And how does it work with like edits and things? Or do you have a lot of say with your position? Or is it more of like the higher ups say, this is how we want it, this is what we want you to execute?
At the end of the day, I get to make the film that I want to make for a bit.
Okay.
Then the people that are paying for it, get me to kind of make the film that they really wanted.
Okay.
And sometimes it really works out and they love what I've done and they go, that's fantastic, and I get to kind of make a film that I'm really happy with. Other times then they kind of move the goalposts or kind of direction because they don't like what they see and then they want to do something else. So, and that's when they become slightly more difficult and a bit more kind of painful. And it varies tremendously depending on the broadcaster you're making it for. So some are real control freaks and you think, why have you employed me? You may as well just do this yourself if you really want to control it to that degree. And others are much cooler and much easier to work with because they give you much more creative freedom. So it just varies from broadcaster to broadcaster, and obviously money as well. The cheaper something, the less people I have telling me above me how I should have done it.
Okay.
There's a lot of people in television that have a brilliant idea after it's been done.
And I guess depending on budgets and time and everything, they can be like, okay, let's go redo all this, or we're just going to go with it and just keep it the way it is.
It all depends on the budget and all depends on the broadcaster. Some of them will say, right, we'll go back and do it again, or we'll do something different, and other ones it's no. Once you spent the money, there's no more.
Okay. And as a director, because I know like some of your films that you worked on, it said director, producer, things like that. What is your kind of process that you go through? So when you start a brand new project, how do you kind of tackle it and what do you do?
It's all to do with story. So the first thing usually to do is to kind of see who else has kind of told the story or see what else has been done around that story and try and get your head around it. And then try and work out the story that I want to tell based on that, because I do a lot of kind of history programs.
You do. There's so many.
There are a lot. And essentially what you're looking for is a way of simplifying a story. That's a lot of time what I do, and work out the story that I want to tell and then speak to people that will help me kind of tell it. You know,
Okay.
that's the way it works. And I, you know, took, excuse me one moment, the dog is gone.
You got a cat too. He wandered in. Oh, he's gone.
Everyone wants to join it. Look, you're making too much noise. Go on. Look, you can get on there. Go on.
That's okay. I have a turtle who's angry at me too right now because he's watching. Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's generally the kind of process. Generally, the process is to just get your head around the story and try and boil it down into something that I think people will find interesting. And a lot of the time, it's what you don't put in. That's the big.
Are you one of those people, like, I know when I work on a lot of things, I kind of like plan a lot of it in my head, and then I kind of have to, like, you know, sketch it out and go with it that way? Or are you one of those other people that's like, you make your outlines and you kind of make a huge plan? Or do you just kind of do it by the seat of your pants?
You generally you make a plan, and that's the first thing that goes out the window. But you always kind of start with an ideal film, and then everything else is a compromise beyond that. You know, so that's the way the process works. You work out an ideal film in your head, and then you try and get people to help you tell it. So, and sometimes you get that story wrong, and people come up with new information. You have to kind of change your story, and that's all part of the process.
Okay.
And that's what you go through for kind of filming. And filming is a bit like kind of playing Scrabble and trying to pick all the right letters to start off with before you edit, to make sure you've got enough bits to say what you want to say. And then when you can get into the edit, then it all changes again, because that's a whole different process of kind of storytelling using the material that you've kind of managed to get. So it's a whole kind of process that happens, and people are often surprised when you say, but it's only an hour documentary, how could it take 9 months to make? And because of that process does kind of take time, and the cheaper things are, the faster things are done, and generally the worse they are. So the things you watch that you think, wow, that was really cool, that was really kind of beautifully done and really well thought out, that probably would have taken someone like an hour documentary 9 months or a year to have made.
Wow.
So they're not a kind of easy thing, and they're quite surprising when you finish them and you look at the script and you go, the script is only 5,500 words. That's all it is for an hour documentary. So it's amazing how much does get thrown out and how much gets simplified.
Okay.
Film. And and I say to people, if you really want to learn about a story, buy the book, read a book. Because television as a medium is only very good at giving you a very kind of vague idea. You won't come away from watching a television documentary incredibly knowledgeable about something. You'll just have a vague idea, because that's what we do. That's the medium that television and video kind of works best in, is giving you a vague idea. It doesn't do deep.
What I really enjoy is when I watch a documentary, I don't watch too many, but when I do, is the fact that it makes me want to go dig and learn something further, as opposed to what I've learned. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to go Google that and look it up. And, even sometimes I'll go and buy a book or other things just to follow up from what I've seen, because it was that good. And it just, it sucked me in and it was interesting.
Yes, they're kind of like a trailer for something else often, particularly historical documentaries, because you're taking just literally the headlines from a story. Not really doing detail. And often these stories, the most interesting things is the detail, but they just don't carry across on television. I've learned that over the years. They just never make it, because people just get lost in the detail. So that's the, in a nutshell, that's the basis of what I've done for the last 25 years. Simplify things a lot.
And can you tell us, because I know you had so many, can you tell us about some other documentaries that you've worked on? Like, what's kind of the difference between the role of, say, the producer and the director? Just because I've seen some of them where you had both, some you did one you did the other.
The producer is the one that makes it happen as well. So that's the role in making the whole thing happen. So as a producer, you'll go out and find all the people, you'll sort out all the locations, you'll work out the money and all the kind of practicalities of making it happen. As a director, you will decide how to tell the story and oversee the whole process of that, in terms of what gets filmed and why and how that's going to fit in, the type of music, and just all the creative side of it, whereas the producer side is creative, but it's much more kind of practical in terms of, you know, how can we interview these, you know, 6 people in these 5 days, or where are we going to film them, or you know, that. So it's always a balance between those, because we always start off with massive creative ambitions, and then when the actual bills start coming in, that's when your ideas have to start changing.
Yeah. And do you have a preference for a role? Like, do you prefer director or producer, or do you care?
I prefer doing both. Both
Okay.
is preferable. And often I have an assistant to kind of help me in that, because there's a lot to kind of do.
Yeah.
But generally, the higher the budget, the more people I have to help.
Okay.
That's
okay.
the
He's like, I don't want to sit up there.
You can't. But there you go. Jump on that.
There you go.
There we go. So stop making noise like a kind of seal in the background there. Right, let's just lie down for a second. Right.
And what are some other documentaries that you've worked on then?
I've done so many. So
I know.
I've done lots. I've done all kinds of things. Everything from documentaries about housing, lots of science documentaries. I've done stuff about HIV and AIDS. I've done all sorts, really. I mean, I'd some years I'll do kind of 4 films in a year. So it does kind of vary an awful lot. You know,
is there a topic particularly that you get really excited about when you find out it's coming for a project and you're just like, yes?
No, because usually one of the biggest problems in television is everyone wants you to have done it before.
Okay.
So, you know, when people approach you about making films, it's because they've seen one you've made before and they want something similar, which is not really what you want to do as a director.
Okay.
And when you do see other projects that you do want to do, people say, well, you haven't really done that before. And you're like, well, no, but that's the kind of purpose of this. Otherwise, we just make the same things again and again and again, which would be really boring. So it's always a kind of challenge, because people always want to know, you know, have you made a program about kangaroos before for, you know, a prime time audience? You say, no, I haven't, but I'd love to. And they go, well, we were looking for someone that's done kangaroos for a prime time audience before. And you just, so yeah, it's a very risk-averse industry, television.
It almost sounds like you get into this just niche and then they'll come to you for that specific thing.
Yeah, and that's what you've got to try and avoid.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise, it's just like, oh, you just do history documentaries, or you just do paranormal shows, or you just do science documentaries, or you just do history. So I've tried to kind of mix it up throughout my career, because otherwise it is very easy to get kind of pigeonholed and just do the same type of thing again and again, which is fun, really.
No, I imagine. I remember, because we've had a few good chats before. And I remember you mentioned before, I think you worked on a paranormal show in England. Did you do something like that?
I did one for America, actually. It's for
okay, for here. Okay.
The Unexplained Files, which I think ran for 2 seasons on Discovery.
Okay.
About 5 years ago, I think I did the last one of them, the last series of them. But I did experiment with some paranormal stuff for that, and that was a hard project, because the purpose of the paranormal, or the purpose of the show, was to try and find some scientific proof or evidence for unexplained phenomena on Earth. So it would be, you know, lots of stories about kind of UFOs and aliens and all kinds of mysterious things that would happen. But Discovery, who were the commissioners, wanted a scientific angle or possible explanation for these things, and I rather foolishly then took the episode that was the paranormal, and it was like, well, hang on, you're not really expecting me to kind of find a scientist that's going to confirm the existence of the paranormal. But yeah, that's what they wanted. It didn't really quite turn out like that.
And doing something like that, like when you're talking about the paranormal, there must be a lot of interesting things that go beyond, like behind the scenes, because I'm sure like all the TV shows that we see all the time, it's like they sit there for hours and they try to catch some glimpse of something happening. Through filming this and working on this project, did you ever see something paranormal, or did you see a UFO or anything like that?
No, I did. Unfortunately, I didn't see anything that I couldn't kind of explain. There was
Okay.
nothing that happened to me during making any of those programs that I thought I've got no explanation for that. That must be something paranormal. Unfortunately, it wasn't like that.
Oh.
I think the difficulty with the paranormal and particularly making films and television programs about it is television operates in a very kind of finite time. We have a very limited time to make a program, whereas if you're a paranormal investigator, you can go and spend 3 years going to try and experience something. Whereas when you're making a television show, it's like, well, it's got to happen on Thursday next week.
Get the ghosts in line. We need them. They've got to show up.
If it doesn't show, then it becomes more kind of problematic. But yeah, we're basing it on there has to be something. So and I think it makes it very hard to make convincing kind of paranormal shows, because whether there is something there or not, the chance of you actually capturing it as a documentary maker is pretty slim. So if not non-existent. So paranormal shows tend to work in a different way, which is to do with the people that we film and them conveying their belief or their understanding of what's there. Because what you'll see on camera, you'll never see anything on camera. You'll only see someone else relaying their experience of what they're hearing, seeing, or something. But the chances of it actually being caught on camera and being confirmed is negligible. So for all the TV, unfortunately for all the kind of paranormal shows that you watch, it is based on the characters that we film or the experts, their interpretation of it. But
now, I was just going to say, speaking like of ghosts and things like that, because I've talked about with you over in England, I find whenever I travel over there, like there seems to be a huge, it's just such a bigger thing. Like I'll go to say a pub and talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, there's like 3 ghosts that we see here all the time. And I find people are more casual about it. I've had a few different encounters in my life here, which I won't get into, but I can't explain what happened. Have you ever had something happen personally over the years?
Not as I say, not something I couldn't kind of explain.
Okay.
I haven't experienced that, but just the nature just of a country like England or a nation like Britain, because of the history and because everything is so old.
Yeah.
You're kind of, 1,000, 1,500 years, and people kind of know what happened in that time. Those stories kind of continue. So there's always a lot of history with stuff, and everywhere seems to be haunted. So everywhere it's kind of it's quite important, really. If you live in a country mansion, there's usually got to be a ghost. There's some kind of thing tied to a particular historic building. So there are. It's a very kind of popular thing here.
I know I love going to Dartmoor, and just because Sherlock Holmes, Hounds of Baskerville. And I remember years ago I went to this little shop and I got a book that actually was about hauntings in Dartmoor. And it's just a local book, but it was so cool because they actually had maps and key places you could go, like Jay's grave and the watching place and stuff like that. And we did go to a bunch of them. So I just like that you can do stuff like that over there. And
you can. It's a big part of big part of history. It's a big thing. There's but a ghost story or ghost legend that pretty much anywhere that has a kind of ancient history has a story with it. So, and they're just they're part of the kind of local legends, really, that just make it the place that it is. So I guess that's harder in kind of newer countries where history only goes back a few hundred years, and then people go, it's just trees and stuff here before. In countries like England and France and Germany, there's history that could go back 5-6 centuries. Then those legends kind of build over that time. And I think with a lot of these things, there's people see what they want to see. So there's an expectation. If you're told a place is haunted and you go there and see something, that really kind of confirms it, that you experienced something there. But if someone told you it's definitely not haunted, there's no one's ever seen anything in there, you're going to go in with a very different kind of mindset. So you don't go to Walmart or.
I know. I think in Vancouver, there's only, if you like Google it and look it up over the years, there's a few places that people say are haunted. And one of them is a huge hotel. Another one is a theater. And then you've got a restaurant. So there's a few places that they have seen repeated scenes of, the ghost popping up. But that leads me to my other question I wanted to ask. So I know that I was fortunate to be on the Curse of the Highgate Vampire because you interviewed me for that. And I remember that you showed me the clip from the cemetery with the paranormal investigators, and I got to give you my opinion about what I thought and everything. I was wondering, what was your opinion on what you saw? What did you think?
I thought, if I'm perfectly honest,
Yeah.
having seen their other videos, I think those guys see ghosts and paranormal activity pretty much everywhere they go.
Okay.
If I'm perfectly honest.
Yeah.
It was great that they kind of did it for a cemetery that I was kind of making a film about, but the same thing happens to them wherever they go.
Okay. I see where that goes then.
Yeah. So that was I didn't kind of take them as being in any way expert, but also not amateur enough for me to be utterly convinced by their experience. So I kind of say that. I think there's a thing that they do and a thing that they get from it.
Yeah.
From these experiences, but it's very similar everywhere they go.
Okay. No, that's good.
Kind of thing, so it was I think harder for them doing a show like this, which was such a much bigger story where so many other paranormal investigators had kind of looked at it. It was a struggle for them. I think it was a bit beyond their comfort zone to actually try and explain things, because I think they are very much experiential. They want to be scared. That's what they do, to go to places to be scared, rather than like lots of other investigators that I come across that go to places because they want answers and they want to kind of find out about things, why things happened, or could there be an explanation behind it, whereas these guys just want to be terrified. That's what they want. So
and with the Highgate Vampire case, because it was such a fantastical story, for people that don't know, it originated back in the 1970s in England. And you have a possible ghost sighting, you have a possible vampire, there's a vampire hunt, there's duels, there's so many things going on. And we still do talk about it 50 years later, obviously, because you guys just did an amazing documentary on this actual topic. What are your thoughts on the case now that you've gone into this whole thing and you went down the rabbit hole?
To be honest, I didn't get to make the film I wanted to make because the way in which the Discovery Channel work and the kind of paranormal programs that they want have to fit a certain mold, and I don't think the Highgate Vampire really kind of fitted in that mold. So it's a very hard film to make, because Discovery very much are based on people experiencing stuff on camera and that being kind of evidence and it being captured, whereas the Highgate Vampire was a much more nuanced case and really interesting, because it really seemed about a story that was really made up. It was a story that was invented by two paranormal investigators, really to try and get publicity at the end of the 1960s for themselves, that then kind of spiraled out of control and developed into all these different things, where the two main protagonists in it then started to believe their own stories. They started to believe the stuff that they'd made up, and then when they started making up different stories, they really fell out. when one was not prepared to believe the other story, and vice versa, and that just ballooned into this whole other phenomena that sucked people in, with these two different sides to a story, one claiming it was some kind of ghost, a paranormal thing, and another one claiming it was a full-on blood-sucking vampire. Just the fantastical nature of the story really attracted me, but just the fact that these two guys came to believe it, and there was no evidence of any of this before this. It wasn't like they were drawing on hundreds of years of history. And people scrabbled around looking for evidence of ghosts around this part of London. And there really wasn't anything. There was kind of some really random stories that are very hard to make very frightening, like, you know, the story of a frozen chicken from some scientist who died at some point in the 18th century. And that was kind of about it. So then suddenly for this vampires and all this, you know, other kind of paranormal activity in terms of like specters that would try and possess people, it was just fantastical. But what really struck me was that it just took off in such a big way that people were prepared to believe it. And that what I was fascinated by, because obviously there was a desire for people to kind of want to believe in stuff like that. And what was most interesting, as I say, was the two main protagonists in this story that kind of came to believe their own stories. And that I found really interesting, because they were utterly convinced that they'd seen or experienced something, and two very different things. But how it got to that, that's what I found really interesting. But in terms of ever coming across any empirical evidence whatsoever for either of their stories, there was absolutely nothing. Zero. Just made up rubbish, you know, that they'd scrolled through the internet and the local library to try and cobble things together, but absolutely nothing concrete at all. But that didn't matter. It didn't matter for the story and for them and for the way it was portrayed in the press. It really didn't matter. And the fact that some people came through and said, "Oh, I've experienced some strange stuff as well," just made it all the much more exciting and interesting. But it was interesting stepping back from it and seeing how these stories had evolved and when and who kind of said it and how it had kind of got out there. And that was really interesting. And I think that was the film I really wanted to make, rather than the kind of experiential ghost hunt that we ended up having to make.
Maybe one day.
Well, I think it's a one-hit wonder. I think this was the one chance to kind of do it while there are people alive now.
Yes, that are still,
And to be honest, this story will kind of die with this, I think. I don't think this was the opportunity to make a kind of 90-minute, believe it or not, type film about these characters behind it. In 10 years' time, it won't really mean anything. Without the actual people in it that were there, won't really survive as a story. It will be an interesting thing in 10 years' time or 20 years' time that people will still make little films about. Oh, there was a story, you know, 100 years ago, people that believed in a vampire in North London. But what's really great about the story, I don't think is going to get told.
Well, and what I used to think was so interesting is, like you said, how it just blew up and just everything happened back then. And then part of me is like, you know, if something like that happened now with social media, it would just be insane, because we didn't, you know, have all these platforms back then. And it was like you had the newspaper and you had TV and you had some radio. So that's what I think. It would be different.
Because people want more evidence. I can't just go on here and say, I saw a vampire. I did. I honestly saw a vampire. And it was over there. You guys wouldn't believe me. You go, well, where's the evidence? We want the photo, we want the, you know, where's the video? You know, I want evidence. Whereas 50 years ago, and just the way in which media worked then, you could just give an interview and say, I have witnessed this. And just the fact it's in print and in a paper that people are reading gives it a kind of certain validity. Whereas now, you know, talk is even cheaper than it was 50 years ago. It was harder to get in the paper, but now media is so all pervasive. I think it would be impossible for a story like this to kind of take off now. I think if just two people came up with this, made this up now, it wouldn't get any traction. They'd have to go much further than saying, I've seen something. You know, they would have to have some really good video evidence or some other kind of empirical evidence, like, you know, bite marks on the neck that people you can actually see, that people were going to need to kind of buy into. But I don't think it's enough just to say it now. Whereas 50 years ago, I think it was just enough if you could persuade the local papers and then subsequently television to kind of cover it, would become a much bigger thing. But, you know, when that story broke, there was, you know, a lot more newspapers, but they were local newspapers that people would read in a print industry that existed, and very few television channels. There were only 2 in the UK at that time.
Oh,
and
wow.
one of them covered this. So there were only
okay.
TV stations. So it's a big deal if it makes it on television. You know? So that's why I think the Highgate Vampire kind of happened then. Could it happen now with social media and things? I think that's a really interesting idea. But how would you create something?
It makes me think actually of, I just thought of it, a case. Have you heard of the Elsa Lam case?
No.
So that's an interesting one. I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, but it was actually a student from UBC out here, and she went to Los Angeles on a little vacation by herself. And I believe I think it's the Cecil Hotel. She stayed there. And again, it's like you talk about different reputations. They have this reputation where so many people have actually died in this hotel. And have you heard of that?
Yes, I've heard of the Cecil Hotel, because that has been made introduced, because there was a bunch of kind of weird suicides there.
Yes.
Strange going on in this hotel that made it stand out amongst other hotels, which then made people think there's something up with the hotel.
Yeah.
People check in there to go and kind of kill themselves or murder someone or something. One of those stories.
And that's the big thing with this case. And what made me think of it was the fact it got so much traction because of social media. And she disappeared. No one could find her. They didn't know what happened. They had this, again, we were talking then about proof, but it's not proof, was they had some video clips of her in the elevator. And it looked like she was talking to someone that wasn't there. So right away, these people are like, oh, was she talking to a ghost? Is it actually haunted? And then they were trying to piece together what had happened to her. And it took, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks till they found her body. And somehow up on top of the roof, they had these water tanks. She had somehow ended up in the water tank, but the lid was closed behind her, which there's no way you could have reached to close the lid. So this started this huge thing, and all these internet sleuths and everyone started these websites and looking into the whole thing. And then it started to uncover that she had some mental health issues. I believe she was bipolar. She'd stopped taking her meds. And they ended up coming to the conclusion that she had fallen in and she had drowned. But people still are speculating. And if you just Google it, there's so many online chat groups and things looking into this because they think she was murdered in the hotel. Yeah, it's an interesting case. And I'd come across it because, again, I found a documentary on Netflix and I was watching it and I was just like, oh, she's from Vancouver, and started looking into it. But it's interesting, though, the whole just movement behind it, what happened to her. And there's just all these different things people started saying about her name. There was actually a certain name that was associated with medications and stuff that was similar to her names. And they just started finding all these random clues that they were trying to piece together. But according to the police, that's what happened, was she unfortunately drowned. So that's what makes me think of this kind of case, is what would happen then. Would people then start trying to find their own? And would they go to the cemetery more often trying to find the vampire or find the ghosts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point of all of these stories is people want to believe. People want to believe in something else rather than the kind of mundane and ordinary. So it's much more exciting to kind of think there's something that must have possessed this poor girl to make her kind of climb up to the roof, or did someone murder her to kind of get in there? Because actually there's nothing very exciting or interesting if it's just a kind of sad case of kind of, well, she was off her meds and she said healthcare net and she ended up kind of killing herself. That's not nearly as exciting as, but
there was a ghost
died here, there must be some other paranormal explanation for it. And I think that's, you know, what makes life exciting, really, is looking for those more exciting explanations for things. And that's what propels a lot of the whole excitement or interest in the kind of paranormal, in the occult, is looking for things that are a bit more interesting than the kind of mundane. stuff, because otherwise there's nothing exciting if people go, but it's just the wind that did it, or it's just a trick of the light. There's no excitement in that, and that doesn't make life worth living.
So I want to change gears a bit and look at one of your other projects, because I did watch it. The one that I looked at was Ancient Assassins, Vlad the Impaler. So of course, just because I'm interested in vampires and other things like that. And after having been interviewed now for something for the documentary, I have to say I have an appreciation now for the whole filming process. It was really cool to get it behind the scenes, and it's actually helped me. I picked up some pointers for while I'm filming my own stuff now, that what I'm doing. So for instance, I filmed a video where I was doing, I was taste testing some candies, and I went and I was thinking about how, when I remember you were setting things up and getting extra footage so you can cut down. And yeah, I had like 40 minutes of footage, and it took me 8 hours of editing. And then I got an 11-minute video. And I was just like, I have such an appreciation for what you guys do. But when I was watching this last night and I was looking at it, and this documentary had so many bloody reenacted scenes and the costumes and the killing scenes and all this stuff. Can you tell me about getting these types of costumes and props for something so specific to like this time period? And how did you go about planning and executing like these dramatic like fight scenes and stuff like that?
That was you'd be amazed in the world of film and television just how many specialist kind of prop and costume companies there are, and these stuff kind of sits around in warehouses. And I don't know the last time someone said, I need a dozen Janissary costumes from Romania in the 13th century, but bizarre, they exist. And I did find somewhere in London that had them, and they were like, well, how many do you want, how big are the actors? And I was able to get those, and I ended up getting the swords from a prop house in Romania, strangely enough, where they do kind of have an industry kind of making these kind of documentaries. I ended up getting those shipped over from Romania. And then I hired people to kind of play the part. So the way a kind of something would work with that, because that was a very exciting take on history. Again, it's another Discovery show for Discovery, and I've done quite a few things for Discovery, and they have a very particular way of doing things or wanting stories to be told. And so you reinterpret that story, and everything has to be true. It's just what you leave out of a story. You can make it more exciting. And so that's the way it worked with a story like Vlad Tepes, and the story of Vlad the Impaler was really kind of boiling that story down to the bloodiest bits that actually kind of happened, or there was some evidence for it happening, there was some kind of basis for it, and weaving that together into a story. So, and yeah, you just start in that kind of process. You start by understanding the historical story and then highlighting the most dramatic bits. They're the bits you kind of focus on, because that's the bit you'll be telling a story about, really. You're not going to tell the really dull bit about Vlad the Impaler's life. You're not going to go into those. You just want to kind of focus on the highlights. And that's the process, and then I interview people, much like you're interviewing me now, but I interview a dozen people and get them to tell me the same thing again and again, various different ways, so that when I come to edit it together, I've got kind of choices to make it exciting and kind of condense the story even more. And that's the way it works. And that was, they're fun ones to do, particularly kind of famous ones like that, because probably what's the hardest thing for me is working out which sources I can really trust in these stories, because a lot of them are stories about stories about stories about stories, and when you go back to the original source, nearly as exciting as it's become.
It's like the telephone game, when everything starts and then it keeps going.
It's like Chinese whispers, and often you go back to the original text or the original story that this is based on, it's actually not nearly as exciting as it's become over the last kind of 500 years, because we do like to embellish things. So it's striking that balance between not going too far down that route and trying to kind of keep it with an historical accuracy to it, but also trying to make it exciting and interesting for the audience, you know, because at the end of the day, they're watching it for an exciting story, not because they really want to know about the inner working of, you know, politics in Eastern Europe and, you know, the 12th, 13th century. They're not really interested in that. They were interested in the story about, you know, a man impaling people and chopping people's noses off. That's what they wanted to watch. So to some degree, that's what you have to give them.
And when you like did some of the scenes in there, like one guy, he basically got a spike through his head and there's blood everywhere. Is that something that you direct, or do you bring in other people to help with like the blood effects and stuff like that?
That was all done super low budget. That was
okay.
unbelievably small crew. So often when you see some of these things on big budget TV shows, and this one wasn't a big budget show, but there can be 100, 200 people on just to make that one, you know, and they'll do maybe film 40 seconds worth of stuff in a day. And sometimes it's one shot that they actually do in a day, but it took 200 people. And whereas with that one, I think it was me and about 4 others, I think we had, and a local crew. So yeah, we hired a local church, did a whole bunch of it in the crypt there. Then we went to the woods, and you know, it looks great, but what you can't see is that, you know, behind us is a car park and you know, and all of that stuff, and everyone's freezing cold and you know, fed up with the lousy food because we haven't got catering and just cold sandwiches. But everyone kind of gets into it, and you kind of get into a rhythm of kind of doing it. And you know, to give you an idea, like a feature film will film for 28 or, you know, 35 days, 40 days to kind of get enough material to make an hour long kind of, or an hour and a half long kind of feature film. Whereas a documentary like that is made in about 3 days, all the drama stuff, 2 days of drama.
Wow.
Yeah. You got to do all of that stuff, all those scenes that you see with, you know, people,
and then get enough so you can cut it down.
It's all done incredibly quickly. We're talking, you know, and as a director, you're most of the time making a decision about what you can afford to lose from your script that you wanted to tell. So it's like, right, that's it. We're not going to do the bit where he meets the messenger. That's it. It's just going to have the message. We'll cut that bit. You know, we're not going to do the bit where he chops that guy's head off. We're just going to focus on this other one because there's just no time. You know, so a lot of time you're
just constantly like improvising, thinking on your feet, and just kind of going with it.
Just trying to boil it down all the time. You're just trying to kind of boil down the story to its essence, and that's what it is. It's really, and there's a brilliant quote. There was a really famous editor called Walter Murch, who I'd never get to work with, who does all the kind of big, really famous feature films, and he's like a, you know, $10,000 a day kind of editor. But he says, you've got a brilliant quote about editing, which kind of applies to everything about kind of filmmaking, which is editing is the ruthless suppression of everything that is unnecessary to the story.
Okay.
And that's what you're doing. Is it really important for the story? Is it really important that you see the guy walking down the corridor? You know, is that really important? Or is it really important you see him opening the letter? You know, which important bit that you're going to really need, and that's what you're asking all the time as a filmmaker for your story, you know, which is the most important bit, because you're not going to ever have time to do them all. And don't make the mistake of kind of focusing, well, we'll do the boring bit first. When you run out of time and you're like, oh my
then
God,
you just got boring bits.
Walking down the corridor and opening the letter, but why did we film with chopping the head off, you know? So that's the basis for it, and that's, you know, pretty much the same for all kind of filmmaking, really. But you know, that said, there are things that come up, and probably what I enjoy most are the documentaries where you don't know the story when you're stuck, and you haven't, and it evolves as you're kind of filming, and they become much more exciting and interesting because that's a different sort of filmmaking.
Okay. And for filming documentaries, I'm sure over the years it must have enabled you to travel all over the world. where are some of the most memorable places you've been fortunate to visit just due to filming projects?
I get to go to insane places. I think, I've been to the CIA. I've been on a tour of Langley.
Oh,
I've
it's
been.
probably not as exciting as it sounds, but I think that would be fun.
No, that was really exciting. It was even just going into offices, just like, this is actually the CIA. This is really kind of, and you've discovered brilliant things, like just going back to the CIA thing. When you see the CIA in films and on television, there's a kind of great big kind of eagle in reception, kind of, tiled into the floor. And there's the kind of Book of the Fallen, which has got no names in it. It's kind of on these big security gates that you see through. And when you go through those security gates, on the left-hand side is a gift shop. And I'm like, I can't believe this. I'm in the CIA and there's a gift shop. And I went nuts in there. I was going, I bought all the mugs and pens, I did the key rings, and it was all absolute rubbish. It was all really cheap, horrible rubbish made in China. And my CIA mug, I think the CIA logo washed off the first time it went on the dishwasher. The key ring broke in a day. The pen stopped working after half an hour. But
it's disappointing.
Surprising things. And I think what the coolest thing I get to do is I get to go to lots of countries. I get to hang out with people and go to their houses. So it's not it's not the kind of big museums or getting to go behind the scenes at kind of various things. It's actually getting to hang out with people and go to their houses and go to their local restaurant with them, and these kind of things that are the most interesting, because once you kind of go behind the scenes at a big institution, they're all kind of very similar. There's none of them that are kind of like, wow, this is absolutely amazing. But it's interesting hanging out with people. That's what makes it exciting and fun. And you do get to see things that most people don't get to see that often, because you just get let into strange places, but then, as I say, the most interesting bit of people, rather than
that's cool. I get that. That's one of the reasons I started doing these interviews with people, is because I like getting people's story behind the story. Everyone has something really cool to tell, and my whole life I've always enjoyed older people's stories, which was, as a kid, I'd be just enthralled, and I would sit there and it's like, tell me about this, or what did you do as a kid? And I still do that, but I just love chatting to people about stuff like that. So
gotcha.
Yeah. And I guess with the documentaries, with concerning locations and traveling and stuff, obviously due to COVID-19, that's totally changed things. So for instance, with my bit in the documentary, you basically did it all virtually, which was amazing to watch. How has this affected you for doing other documentaries? And do you see that this is going to be changing a little bit of your industry as we move forward? Because COVID's not just going to vanish out of thin air, obviously.
To be honest, it had already started changing before COVID. So I'd already, long before kind of COVID came, I'd already made a documentary about the space shuttle, but I never for that one I didn't travel because of it wasn't a money thing, it was just a time thing. When I had to have the program made, that it just wasn't physically possible for me to fly to all those locations and do those interviews, so I did them kind of virtually. And it didn't really make any difference, I don't think, to the final product. I don't think those astronauts spoke any differently speaking to me like we're speaking now over than they would have done if I'd have been in the room with them. So I think that's going to kind of stay and become more of a, and it's been around a while in television, that do this, but I think it's just become more prevalent now. But it all just depends on the project. I think there are still certain things where, particular interviews and certain stories, where it's just not going to be possible to do it over chats over Zoom and things like that. It's going to have to be, spending quality time with people and kind of understanding their story and being with them and talking to them. But yeah, I mean, it's COVID has kind of knocked the traveling thing out quite a bit, but I think it's getting back to normal now. I don't think it's kind of slowing down. Okay. rather ironically, it's kind of been a good thing for television in a funny way. People have watched more of it.
That's true. Yeah, people are at home and they're watching more, Netflix, binging whatever they want to do, and it's like I can say I've watched more stuff just because you're not going out as much.
No,
So.
that's it. And so that's been a kind of boost, really. But at some point, it's going to tail off because it's obviously it's much more exciting to go and experience it for yourself rather than just watch it on television. As much as I hate saying that, but it is true.
That's true. Do you feel that I would imagine it would be more challenging to do things virtually, or almost frustrating because you just want to do something a certain way and you're not there? Or do you find you're okay with it, or is it just kind of you adapt to it?
I mean, it's with particularly kind of being a director, you're often kind of always trying to relay your vision to other people and get to do it. And whether you're doing that over the telephone or you're doing that in person, or it's a very similar kind of process, I think.
Yeah.
And as I say, where it becomes harder is that having the face-to-face conversation with someone is quite different to doing it over Zoom. So I think it all depends on what you're getting people to talk about. If recounting a story they've recounted lots of times before, it's probably not really going to make any difference to them and the story they tell, whether they're talking to you on a computer miles away or you're in the room with them. But if it's something that someone has never spoken about before, it's obviously kind of difficult for them. You're going to get something very different if you're in the room with them and able to spend more time with them.
Something that's more emotional, or
more emotional, or more complex to kind of explain, and people find that harder. It's a big part of what I do as a director is trying to make people ignore the alien experience of being filmed, as if there isn't a camera there, as if there isn't three other people in the room looking at their watches, staring out the window, moaning about the fact they haven't had lunch yet and all of that stuff, and ignore all of that kind of going on to just kind of focus on the conversation
and just connect with you and just talk.
Try and ignore all that other stuff and just talk to me. So that's what that's a big part of what I have to do.
Okay. And to date, I think I estimated on your CV that you've done about 40 documentaries. You've probably done more because I imagine they're not all on there. How did you get into doing documentaries? And is this just something like years ago when you've gone to school? Is this what you wanted to do? Or were you more like you wanted to do film and other stuff and then kind of found you love doing this? Or
I just found my way through it. I went to art school. So
okay.
You go to art school, you get to do what you like. So, and after doing that for about 3 years, I was like, people doing the film seem to, they only seem to have to work about once a week because there's only a finite amount. And maybe that's a really good thing to get into because they don't seem to have to do as much work as anyone else. And then when I got into it, and I found documentaries really interesting. When I found the whole kind of artistic world of documentaries and realized that actually documentaries aren't ever really the truth. It's always someone's interpretation of reality, and that's what makes them so interesting. And that's what kind of got me into it. And I thought, well, actually, the only way I can kind of do this is to get into television, into casting, because that's the kind of route I went, and and I was, I'm kind of glad I did because I have got to go all around the world and I have got to kind of meet loads of interesting people, see lots of odd things, and it's just a more fun way to kind of make a living, So.
And would you say out of all the ones you've done, which one would be like a labor of love for you? Which one are you most proud
of? None of them really, to be honest. Once they're kind of done, they're done. That's it. It's over. They're so intense and in the moment, and you just tend to live that one film for the time that you're making,
and then just move on to the.
And then just move on. Yeah, they're not because they're not. I think it's different for other filmmakers that have a a story that they really want to tell, and they spend years looking into it, years kind of doing it, and then they kind of spend years making it.
Yeah.
That's a very different sort of filmmaking than being a director for any of the video on demand channels or broadcasters, because that is all much more on a kind of finite time, finite delivery.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a kind of industry thing, so it becomes very intense for a few months or 6 months, however long it kind of takes to make it, and then you're kind of off it, and often they become your passion. They're not things that you pick because that is your kind of passion.
Yeah. Okay.
You become passionate about because you're going to make a film about it, but it's not necessarily something you think, I've always wanted to do that, and I don't think many of us in the industry get to kind of do that,
Okay.
because everyone's got bills to pay, and
yes,
you don't get to kind of just go, that's it, I'm not doing anything except films about vampires,
or kangaroos.
Or kangaroos, or vampiric kangaroos, which would obviously be a but you don't get to do that, because people, you have to, you're at the whim of what broadcasters want.
Yeah.
Whether they want you to do it or not. So
is there any fun or any new project that you can let us know that you're working on, or are you just kind of in between right now, or?
No, there's nothing I'm working on at the moment. So
okay.
no, I haven't even started looking yet. But
okay.
there's other stuff I'm kind of writing at the moment. So there's the stuff I am interested in. I'm really interested in doing a series about dogs.
Oh, okay.
I'm really interested in that. And the reason I got so interested in dogs is because you look at all the different breeds of dog in the world, and you go, oh my God, look at that. There's cute little ones. There's little Pomeranians, these cute little Chihuahuas, and these enormous Great Danes. And the only reason any of those exist is due to us, man, because dogs are the most genetically diverse species on the planet, because they all evolved from wolves. But the only reason one wolf ended up being a tiny little Chihuahua that can sit in the palm of your hand, and another one ended up being a dog half the size of a horse, is because of us and what we throughout history have kind of done. If we've molded these creatures, so they actually tell a much bigger and more interesting story about us than they do actually about the dogs themselves. So they're the first animal we domesticated. So they've got a really fascinating history when you look beneath dogs. So, and that's one thing I was really interested in at the moment. And I'm working on something to try.
And you're writing this? This is your baby
at the moment. So, and that's an aspect of program making I really enjoy. So I've been doing that. I do some other stuff about houses as well at the moment. So
okay,
I'm interested in finding everyday things that tell an extraordinary story about our past when you actually look at them from a different perspective. Like, oh my God, I didn't really realize the significance of this thing that I've kind of taken for granted, how it got to be that way. I find really interesting. So I'm trying to do some stuff about that. And so, yeah, probably for next year, hopefully I'll do one of those. If not, maybe it will be vampiric kangaroos. Don't know until I make the effort to get out there and start applying for stuff. You just don't know, really. So all the phone rang. I didn't plan to make a film about the Highgate Vampire. They called me up to ask me to make it. So
yeah. Okay. And when you aren't working then or doing your project about dogs that you're looking at doing, what do you do when you have some downtime? What do you enjoy doing to relax?
Nothing. I actually really enjoy doing absolutely nothing. Not reading anything, not doing anything. That's what I really enjoy. I enjoy the moments of just being able to take the dog out, just not answer the phone, and I'm lucky the kind of older if I'm kind of able to do that more and more.
Okay.
Ignore stuff.
I get it. It's nice on days off to, I sit and play with my turtle. So, yeah.
But they're the things I really enjoy. And I guess because I'm lucky that I do something really interesting for work and go interesting places. When I'm not working, I don't feel the urge to kind of go places and kind of do stuff, because it feels like work then. It's just like, what are we doing this? Okay.
So, And can you tell us a fun fact about you that nobody knows? Is there something cool you can share with us?
I don't know. A fun fact that nobody knows. Unfortunately, most people know most things about me. I haven't really got any secrets, so that's a bit of a problem, really. I can't think of a fun fact that nobody knows.
Okay.
Everyone does seem to know everything, I'm afraid. Yeah.
You're an open book then.
Well, it's a very short book. It's the book only has 2 pages. I guess it's more of a pamphlet than a book.
Then the last one I have for you, what is the most absurd thing that you love?
The most absurd thing that I love, I think the absurd thing that I love, stupid cars. I've got a bunch of really stupid cars that I've kept for years.
Okay.
They're really absurd that I drive around in cars that are like 40 years old. That's utterly absurd. And it's now becoming I'm actually going to have to stop doing it because they are so living in London. They charge you a special for driving an old car, and that's made them kind of too expensive now. But that was probably the most absurd, stupid thing I've done. Is that why have I spent so much time and effort just because I like these old things?
Do you drive them, or they just kind of sit there and you admire them?
No, I fix them and I drive them. When it's been a hobby for years. It's been an utterly boring hobby that I never really talk about. I don't go to any other car things with other people. I'm not part of any group or anything. It's something I do for myself. But yeah, I guess that's probably the most dumbass thing that I do. It's just I rescue a car that was destined to turn back to rust and back to iron ore. Why don't I just let it go on its journey to that? Why go to all this effort to try and keep it going?
But you enjoy it, so that's why you do it.
Yeah, I do enjoy it. There is a certain satisfaction going, that pile of rust is now going at 120 miles an hour, all thanks to me. But
I get it. I've always, since I was a kid, I've got a weird thing is I like to take things apart and put them back together or fix them. And when I was a kid and I was younger, I did electronics classes, I did mechanics classes. I was the only girl, but I did all of those. And it's just, I like doing that, is looking at stuff and like seeing, what you can do with it. So I get it. That's good.
It's good. It is fun. It's fun kind of understanding things, and I think that's probably similar to kind of making films and doing kind of what I do, but it is just about kind of understanding how things work.
Yeah.
Now I know how it works, I'll move on to something else, or occasionally it's just too complicated. Or actually, why am I trying to learn this? I'm really, it is beyond me. I'm not gonna, we'll just have to let that bit not work.
Okay. Well, we're almost out of time, but before we wrap up, everyone, I just want to make sure that you like the video and subscribe now, hit the button below. And if you haven't checked out, make sure to watch The Curse of the Highgate Vampire, which is now available on Discovery Plus. I encourage you guys to go check it out. It's really good. And thank you, Andy, for coming on the show today. It's been amazing. I've enjoyed our chat. I enjoyed our chats before too, but this was great. And otherwise, thank everyone from watching at home. This is great, and I'm having a good time moving forward with the series that we're doing. And did you have anything else to add, or you're good?
I'm good. I'm afraid I have nothing else to add. I'll let you know when I make another film.
Okay. No, that'd be great. I'd love to see it. And otherwise, that's it for Morbid Planet today. Everyone, stay safe and stay morbid. Bye for now.